Just want to confirm.
Okay, Steve, kick us off.
There you go. You're live.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us once again. Welcome to the Annapolis Small Maritime Business Work Group. This is our second meeting. And I guess the first thing we should probably do is do another round of introductions because we have a few new faces that we didn't have at our last meeting. So let's see, best way to do this. Jennifer, can you start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen with the Schooner Woodwind and Woodwind 2.
Okay, Sean.
Hello, Sean Owen, and I own Chronic Sailing, a charter company based at Port Annapolis Marina.
Seth.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a residence in town. I'm also affiliated with Horn Point Harbor.
Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Madden, and I'm the Human Resources Manager for M Yacht Services, and we're in Bert Jabin's Yacht Yard.
Okay, and Mike.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Tomasini. My wife and I own and operate Pirate Adventures out of Eastport.
And obviously, well, maybe not obviously, I'm Steve Rice, Economic Development Manager for the City of Annapolis, just to start off the city staff introductions. I did see Chris. I don't see him anymore. So let's go to Eric.
Hey everyone, Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the city in the Planning and Zoning Department. Good to be here.
And Lisa.
I am Lisa Minker, the Zoning Enforcement Officer for Planning and Zoning.
And last but definitely not least, Hope.
Hi, Hope Stewart, Small Minority Business Liaison, Economic Development Office.
And if Chris rejoins, then of course we'll reintroduce him. Did everyone get a chance to look at the minutes from the last meeting? Any issues, corrections, or anything like that? Okay, so I guess we should probably formally adopt the minutes by taking a vote. All those in favor, please. Let's see, Ryan is joining. Please raise your right hand or indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries with or without Ryan's participation. Ryan, are you with us now?
I'm with you, and I'm an aye for the minutes.
Okay, excellent. Could you introduce yourself?
Yep, Ryan Copeland. I'm the co-president and general counsel of Acme Marina Company, which is the owner and operator of the Annapolis Landing Marina.
Awesome. So we've gotten through the, I guess, the front end business of the meeting, and we can go right into the discussion of 02521. A couple things I did want to, I'll just say once again, last meeting we talked about how the 02521 legislation has impacted your businesses, and obviously that was reflected in the minutes. We also asked you, the work group members, what zoning changes were needed to help the maritime businesses flourish. And you were asked to review the table of uses because this came up at the last meeting, and there was a sense that some of the uses had become outdated. So we asked you to review the table of uses to come up with some recommendations for how the table could be updated. So I know that's a mouthful. And then we also have I'll just call it a presentation by Seth, because I know he's done some homework and he wants to share his research with us. So before we move to Seth, and I know his presentation will start a conversation, is there anything based upon the questions and the homework from the last meeting that someone would like to share? Any reflections, perspectives? All right.
I'll jump in with a quick question, Stephen, on that.
Okay.
If it's okay with everybody. So, as far as the table of uses themselves go, I read through this. I've read it through previously, and I'm kind of putting out there and wondering to everybody how do you, to what good does it do to strike something which is arguably obsolete? And I made that in my notes as well for the other conversation. But the reason I say that is because here, I'll give a quick example. There's something in here about antennas. Isn't that in the use table?
It's possible.
Here we go. So
Yeah, we
here it
got
is.
Lisa here.
On page 8 of 9, other uses, antennas and amateur radio stations. So looking at all 4 of the zoning districts, WMC, the columns there, right? As an example, just pulling it off the table, antenna towers, antennas, and amateur radio stations. So yeah, I'm hoping we can all agree, we would all agree by naturally that that's now obsolete. But is that our purpose here, is to strike things which are literally obsolete?
We actually still do get permits in for antennas and such. An example would be the Annapolis Waterfront Hotel. Frequently, we get in permitting for changing out equipment from like Verizon, T-Mobile. So that actually is still a use category. It's just an accessory use, so it's not really, a primary use. It's just saying that you can have that, those types of equipment needed for communications on a building that's a permitted use.
Understood. So then, Lisa, the reason I'm sort of posing this is because you almost look at it like, well, how do you prove a negative, right? Or why would we as a group proactively strike something which even today may by some stretch have, in the example you just used, right? I wouldn't have never thought that. So, but it turns out it's valid.
Yeah, I mean, they still come in that way. Sometimes they come in as like the telecommunication facilities in the small cell, but I think occasionally one for an antenna does come in.
Yeah, and Seth, I think you were the one who had posed this question last time. So I guess maybe you can explain why you think this would be something you wanted us to look at.
No, well, right, just because I don't know what I don't know, right? So it would never,
okay.
Being in this world of maritime conversation, it would never, like, immediately I go to, there are those giant antennas at the end of Greenberry Point, right? So that's what in my world, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, of course, who the hell is going to build that today? This is now obsolete. Lisa's proven the point that this is actually remains valid. It probably is appropriate to leave it be. Okay, fine. So then as you continue to look at the list, well, then what would be a criteria by which we would strike something? I guess it's possible there is no criteria. Maybe you leave them all alone. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, how do you know what you don't know?
So 2 quick things, Seth. I know at the last meeting you specifically mentioned, as I recall, seafood processing as something that isn't really a staple in Annapolis anymore. And I guess the counter, unfortunately, to that is that if we did have a seafood processing operation that did want to open in the city, and obviously we don't have that
Yeah.
that now, then without having the use, that would create a little bit of a challenge.
So we're talking about, Stephen, parallel things, and Lisa, you'll jump in here to help me with this for sure. The one element of is seafood processing permitted? And of course, we all agree, yes. The second element of it is it's now being used as a benchmark for which certain properties have to meet a criteria in order to expand what they offer to the general commercial public, right? So there's a subtlety to that in seafood processing in and of itself. Sure, it makes sense to me. I mean, it's certainly a maritime use, and it's been a history of Annapolis, but now it's being used as a threshold from 1987 through today. It's being used as a hurdle or a threshold that a certain properties have to meet in order to do additional things at that property.
Well, it's not if you don't have seafood processing, you can't expand your non-maritime use. I mean, that's not, it's one of a few things that if you had, when it would enable you to expand your non-maritime use. So it's really more of an incentive as opposed to.
No, it's not. I'm sorry,
not,
I don't mean to point it out, but it's literally 9,000 square feet of seafood processing. That's what's noted.
Sure, but it's not the only thing that you have to. It's not the only way to expand your non-maritime use.
No,
You're saying
right.
it's a required hurdle, and it's not. If you don't have that, you can't do anything.
Right. I'm not disputing that either, but what I am pointing out is that size of demarcation is noted as a threshold, right? So I don't mean to jump into my own thoughts. I don't want to interrupt that, but we are talking about two parallel things. So for example, if someone today created a 4,000 square foot seafood processing commercial use within WME, then it would not meet the definition of the requirement according to the threshold of the 1987 version and now the 2021 version. So while yes, you could certainly endeavor a commercial seafood processing activity in all these zones, no problem, it's allowed, but it's not going to meet a threshold for the property to expand what it offers commercially. That's what's brought us to today, unfortunately. You follow me? So I'm not disputing that. I think it's very valid. I have no problem with it at all. I don't think anybody would.
Yeah. Well, if the threshold is 9,000, then a 4,000 square foot seafood processing operation, you're right, would not meet the threshold.
Wouldn't meet any requirements. So I don't want to use the word arguing because I don't want to be argumentative, but what's happened is we as a community in 1987 established that 9,000 square feet contemporaneous to the McNasby's facility. McNasby's is now no longer processing seafood. That rule remains in place through 2021. That rule is re-emphasized through the 2021 legislation, and it remains in place today. So I don't believe anybody would argue that we should eliminate seafood processing by any stretch. That would be terrible. But to continue with that as the threshold for a WME commercial property to expand what it offers I would argue that is obsolete.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the history on the 9,000 square foot.
I'm not certain either. It just happens to be that's
threshold.
I mean, that's right. That's where we are. Right.
I don't know if Eric or Lisa has some further insight.
Steve, may I ask a clarifying question? This is Chris. So Seth, you're basically saying that that standard, should it remain, it should be right-sized to be more compatible with smaller maritime uses. Is that the point you're making
Yeah,
here?
Chris, I'll jump right on that one. Sure. I mean, I think that right sizing is a fantastic way of addressing what's occurring today versus 1987 versus years prior to that. So I hope, I'm certain I speak for Ryan in this and all of us as well. I would only hope that people come back and shuck oysters and processed seafood and crabs and everything else. Great, supported entirely. The threshold by which that measure is now used to allow a WME property to endeavor into a broader scope of offering commercially is obsolete. So we can leave that as a benchmark, no problem, but we have to change how it's drafted to accommodate what reality today. Okay. And so, Chris, I think you said that eloquently. I think that's
Yeah,
accurate.
so I get that. So, I mean, we're after how these regulations impact small maritime uses or potentially could. And I think that's the type of feedback we're looking for to open up further exploration into zoning and other discussions, policy level. So that's spot on.
I think right sizing is a fantastic and appropriate term here. I dare I say, I don't think that anybody truly is looking to strike all of the good work that's been done here. I do believe that there's a lot of reasonable stuff that could come of this, but to use a hard, fast number, frankly, for all of these benchmarks that were created now almost 40 years ago is not prudent for today and going forward. And Stephen, again, I just want to underline that is my reading and my understanding of these codes and these zone uses and everything. And I'm believe me, Lisa is the pro. I am not. But my understanding is that the code of uses is a parallel conversation to what is required of the existing property within WNE in order to expand what it offers to its customers, its clients, its, what it can offer to the general public and so on. They are tied together, but they are not one and the same.
Eric, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say was, I guess I could piggyback onto Chris's comments. I mean, in general, we are seeing trends of smaller footprints for a whole wide range of uses, and encouraging that. I guess my only counterpoint would be, and I think this is some of the discussion that came during the task force was, is there a threshold at which a certain use needs to be viable, and I think that's just I think we may need to do some research on our end to kind of understand, is there a threshold for a process?
Do you mean, Eric, you mean commercially viable?
Yeah.
I would assume. Okay, good. Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to use real time, okay, we could, I don't want to put anybody's ideas in their head that aren't, you know what I mean? But you could realistically look at the wild seafood country thing on Bayshore Avenue, right? Right next to the museum. I mean, we could all say he's processing seafood. I mean, he does. He brings in fish, he cleans them, he's got crabs, oysters, all of it, right? We've all been there. So you can make that argument. Now, his facility is a fraction of 9,000 square feet, and we have to hope he's making money, right? We want him to make money to survive. He's got to make money. So whatever that setup is for today's purposes, a fairly reasonable way of describing, what's happening with the seafood business in Eastport and Annapolis. I'll be quiet for a moment, but that's the way I look at it.
Seth, why don't we, I think this is a good segue, since you have some stuff you wanted to share. Maybe we could go into your presentation.
Sure. I am terrible at doing that sharing thing. So Stephen, I did email to you and Hope. I think Hope, there's Hope. I emailed it to both of you. If you have a way of putting that up, that would be fantastic.
Hope,
Sorry, I'm doing the minutes.
Okay, all right, let me see. Give me a second here.
Or you
Hey,
could send it to
Steve.
Eric. My bet is Eric is a pro at this.
Eric, you want us to send it to you? Or what?
Or maybe Lisa. I don't know, but I
guess.
know
Let
it's
me,
not
Or Mark? Maybe Mark.
I
don't
can
know.
share it if you send it to me.
Mark.
I can share it as well.
Okay, I'm gonna forward it to Mark because he's got the controls for everything. So
Let's do that.
he's
There are
kind of
two
at the
documents.
helm.
Right.
So
There are two documents in there. One
You don't
is a
want me to try, I
spreadsheet.
won't.
Yep. So one is a spreadsheet. I think we look at the spreadsheet first. In my
All
opinion.
right. Hey, Stephen, while we're waiting for that to come up, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Seth said and per the discussion. I think Chris nailed it on the language. I think that a lot of the reason that the seafood processing thing didn't get discussed in the Maritime Task Force when we were going over this stuff was because a lot of us thought that 9,000 square feet of seafood processing was probably something that was never going to come back. But to have the trigger include a smaller number, you know, where commercial viability exists, is something that we should look at instead of striking it all together, which is a really, really good point, Seth. If 9,000 square feet is no longer going to happen, then what's the number that might? And if we want to continue to encourage that kind of business on the waterfront, then how do we make it happen? So thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Okay. Now I don't know how to use the cursor.
Just tell me what you want to do.
Sure. On the upper left column, A1, you can see that I started this spreadsheet graph work back when this came about with the city. This changing of what can be allowed in the certain zones. So I've had this in my computer for a little bit of while here, and I chose to look at this from a formulaic mathematical perspective versus a touchy-feely kind of thing now, admittedly, we just had a little bit of a touchy-feely conversation about seafood processing, right? We just did that, but that could be discussed more formulaically. And this that you're about to see is in by no means complete. So I want to make it crystal clear. This is a work in progress. It's a snapshot of what I think is happening today. And it's based on we're 1987 and now 2021. So for example, the WME in the left column is the zoning. Here are a snapshot of several waterfront properties which are in WME. In addition to that, you'll see I noted row 12 and row 12 or 13, 14. These are properties, Farr Building, Weems and Plath, et cetera, which are also in zone WME, but are not waterfront. They have no access to the water whatsoever, okay? And the reason that's important as a side note is we can't help but point out that a lot of the requirements for WME, if not all of them, are waterfront related. Okay. So we have commercial space, commercial buildings in WME, which have quite literally nothing to do with the water. They may see the water, but many do not. So Eastport Yacht Center, let's start at the very top. Here's an example. They have 11,000 square feet under roof. I found that by using Google Earth and or MSDAT. The reason that that's important, and I'm not noting the size of the land or the size of the waterfront or the number of boats that they have or the number of slips or docks or piers or pilings, any of that. The reason that I'm targeting the square feet that they have under roof is because, again, most, if not all, of these benchmarks, these thresholds, the stuff that the city is using has something to do with how many square feet is under roof, okay? Has nothing to do with the number of customers, nothing. Nothing to do with the number of boats at that marina, nothing. But we're using the number of square feet under roof. So I work your way down. Alsop has 5915, 5952, Horn Point, and so on and so on. To move yourself to the right, the allowable net prior to 2021, 0. In other words, how much non-maritime business activity is allowed at that property, 0. to go into 2021, the city adopted these various policies that allows, with a trigger, up to 15% of that property being able to be used for commercial activity that doesn't have an affiliation to maritime use. In this case, Eastport Yacht Center could, by rights, get to 1,740 square feet of commercial activity. They could then expand that by another 5% to 580 square feet by paying a $200,000 fee, or enacting one of these other lists, a water taxi landing, a recreational water access, the list goes on, 150 parking spaces, community boating facility. Unfortunately, the way I'm saying unfortunately intentionally, unfortunately, of all of those various triggers or incentives, the only one that's clearly identifiable monetarily is the $200,000 fee. The balance of them, I don't know how you identify that as a business owner. At some point, you have to look at things in dollars and cents. I don't know what today a crabbing or fishing facility would cost if Eastport Yacht Center wanted to expand the use by another 580 square feet. So I have to dumb it down to $200,000. The next column takes that and does a very simple math. It will cost Eastport Yacht Center $345 per foot to add 580 square feet to something under roof, which can then be used for commercial business activity in the WME zone. The next column is the total maximum according to the code, which that Eastport Yacht Center could ultimately achieve if they made it through all of these benchmarks, 2,320 square feet. Okay. You can see again, I did this by zone. It is not complete. This is a work in progress. All the way to the right is the percentage increase. Okay. How did I find that? Well, I did some work with WMM and WMI. Before we get to that percentage increase, though, let's go down to WMM. Now, we know that WMM has the single biggest benefit of this current ordinance and legislation because they expanded from 30 and can ultimately get all the way up to 55%. The Annapolis City Marina and 222 Severn and Yacht Haven, they are the single biggest winners in all of this. And how is that? Well, today, Annapolis City Marina has 74,000 square feet rentable under roof. Again, according to these third-party things, I didn't come up with this, okay? They could, prior to 2021, lease up to 30% of that to a commercial endeavor that didn't have anything to do with maritime. That equals 22,240. If they meet the first series of benchmarks, they can get to 45%. They now can increase that to 33,360 square feet. And finally, if they do the even further, they can get up to 55%, increasing it yet again. Their total that they can get to is well over 40,000 square feet of use for non-maritime commercial activity. And take a look, interestingly, at what it actually costs them in real dollars to achieve that: $27 per foot. Compare that to Safe Harbor. Compare that to Seashell Marina. Compare that to, I don't know, their own competition, Pier 4. Okay. So in real dollars, they win by a landslide. Okay. Why is that important? Well, because the entire marketplace, the maritime industrial zone marketplace, only has so many square feet under roof. Okay. In this quick spreadsheet, we find the sum of each of these noted. WME has 49,755. I'm looking at column D. WMM has 170,000 square feet under roof. WMI has 137, the Jabins, Port Annapolis, Annapolis Landing, et cetera. So we have a grand total, just again, in this snapshot of 357,000 square feet under roof today, according to these third parties, right? We can then move over all the way to the right to the numbers in red. And you'll see that what I did is I broke that out formulaically to tell you how the impact of the current thresholds and how that affects WME. WME on a percentage ratio basis, strictly dollars and cents, is now left with a possible increase of just 12% compared to the other two zones. On top of that, I would argue that not one of these WME properties can actually achieve them. The first of which, most obvious, is that there are only two, maybe three at best properties that can actually meet the first series of requirements, the 20,000 square foot working yard and or the 25,000 feet of on-land boat storage. Why is that? Because the majority, by far, of these parcels are much smaller even than 20 or 25,000 square feet. They'll never get to that. Okay, so an example: Butler's Marina, Seashore Marina, etc. They do not have the land to actually provide commercial services to meet those thresholds. Okay, so even at best, even if some miracle of whatever occurred, that all of these zoned properties could come up with $200,000, could meet all of the various requirements just to get through the first series, you're still at a major, you're still so far behind. We only offer an additional 9,900 square feet of the entire zone. Okay, so I think what's happened here is two things. One is the code and the zoning and all of the things that have been enacted over time are looked strictly at what's on land of these waterfront properties, and what do we how do we manage the noise about what can be used on land, and how can they be developed? Okay, what's not being looked at is the number of slips that the waterfront properties offer, the number of customers, the number of pilings, the number of piers, all that stuff. That's gone. That's not being discussed. To try and rework how the city thinks is probably a bridge too far, right? But what may not be a bridge too far is to go back to the city. And by the way, I know Chris and Eric and Stephen, Lisa, you're all part of the city, so don't take that the wrong way. Forgive me, the councilman, the alderman, et cetera. Maybe the thing to do is go back to them and say, look, this is fine and dandy. We don't have any interest in rewriting this code, but we do need to amend and edit in a formula which is fair for the WME properties. And that's where I'm really going with this. I've paused here intentionally in my work, because if the panel believes that this is no way in hell is this ever going to happen, then frankly, I'm going to spend my time on other things. But if you like the idea of where I'm headed, then I'm happy to continue. That's the work product for this spreadsheet.
Seth, did you also want to go through your written material, or did you summarize that?
I think I'm happy to go through it if everybody wants to hear me, but maybe the thing to do is pause here and see if everybody kind of gets the gist of this spreadsheet before we go away from it. And by the way, point out something where I'm terribly wrong. I'm happy to, maybe I've missed something crazy.
Any questions for Seth? Reactions?
Is Ryan on the call still? Didn't I put that in?
Yep, we're here. I think the analysis makes sense.
Okay. The only thing is that I'm using 2021 data. So if there's been any significant changes in size of people's buildings and that sort of thing within the last 3 full years, it wouldn't be on here. I could go and work through that again. But at the time when I did do this work, I did talk to several of the managers, owners, et cetera, and confirmed with them that, is it fair to say, for example, with Eastport Yacht Center, is it fair to say that your building is 11,600 feet? And I got back, yeah, that's pretty much the size. So that's a quick snapshot.
So Seth, just to kind of move the needle here, is there a specific recommendation you have for how WME should be treated and or what that formula should be?
Yeah, I think the formula needs to be based on two things, and that's in my next document. And I haven't perfected it, but if you want to now go to that next document, this is just written stuff, and we can quite literally jump to the bottom of it and then come back to the top. Because what would be ideal is if, look, I'll make up a formula and propose it. I'm happy to do that. And maybe that would be the catalyst to get to that point. Okay. But here you go. Excuse me. So at the bottom, I've already talked about a lot of this, but right there. Oh, I'm sorry. Pause right there. Right there. Okay. So for example, parcel 311 Chester, right? So I used it. So they have, and this marries up with the spreadsheet you just saw. So they have 5,952 square feet under roof in a zone that has 49,755 square feet in total WME. And they're part of a gross maritime zone that has today 357,342 feet. So somewhere in there is a way to create and establish and work from a formula that is fair to 311 Chester that allows them to expand based on something. Okay. What it will ultimately, what I'm projecting now, what my suggestion would be is, because that $200,000 number is a fixed number, it works its way into a fraction of that. Okay. And the reason I say it that way is because there's really no way that 311 Chester will ever create 150 on-site parking spaces. In fact, I don't know that anybody can. Maybe Burt Jabins, maybe. A community boating facility, however, is the exact opposite. So it's possible that 311 Chester, that they can work with the city and indeed come up with something that is reasonable, right? So you have two things in the very same category to get to that 10%, which are quite literally polar. There's no way that they can create 150 parking spaces. It's just not going to happen, versus maybe they can reasonably come up with a community boating. Okay. The only thing in the middle there is the $200,000 fixed figure. So I would suggest we target that and come up with a formula that works its way into something reasonable there. Okay. I'll pause for a minute. Keep going.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Okay, the top.
Hey, Seth, hold on. It's Mike. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so just quickly to clarify, because I can see the point that you're making, but for the people who aren't in the meeting and are going to watch it, online later, or or are watching it online now, when you say expand, you're talking about expanding their non-maritime offerings in their existing footprint. So,
of course.
Right. What you're really looking for is you're expanding their flexibility, just so people don't hear it and then think, oh my God, this means that they could build a bigger building over there, or right. And then we
right. I mean,
square one, where we're trying to put out that fire. What we're really talking about here is if we bring the trigger qualification possibilities down, then it just means that these property owners can potentially rent to non-maritime tenants in a small format.
Mike, you're dead on. I'm not suggesting any of this trumps building regulations by any stretch. Okay, what I am suggesting is using the existing platform that the city has chosen to demarc what would a commercial property owner be able to expand his service, okay, commercially. Let's use what's in place, but let's put a formula in there that's fair and equitable to anybody who has a stake in a parcel in a maritime zone property. That's what I'm suggesting. Okay. So
right on. That's perfect.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so and I'm going to skip right past my first opening paragraph. I'm going to move right down to issue A. And we just talked about the bulk of that. For example, a 2,000 foot parcel designated of course has more land to meet those triggered requirements, seafood processing, a 20,000 foot yard, a 25,000 foot land, etc. All of this is driven by the size of your dirt. It is not driven by anything other than how much dirt you have. Okay. So I have a lot of opinions of that, but I'm not going to put those completely to the side, because this is where we have to we have to deal with what's in front of us, right? WMZ zone property is now not only limited by land size, to no fault of its own, of course, but it is now limited by the triggers which drastically reduce its ability to attract and retain free market tenants, renters, and customers. I think I've already given a lot of detail on that. The effect of it is strikingly disparate. I've shown you that on that work product. Okay. And then of course I give an example. I think we can continue moving down this page. Yeah. Okay, so let's pause here for a minute. So the use of the trigger to expand the breadth to uses to renters and customers seems to be the only method by which the council can contemplate current and foreseeable expansion of use. Okay, that's fine. It is what it is. While rewriting the zone and the code seems a bridge too far, I think we all agree on that. The triggers themselves are hurdles that are too high to leap. So the requirements are so tall, we simply can't get there. Okay. So to reasonably balance this measure, while in the throes of the city's council efforts to set these trigger benchmarks in 2021, the WME stakeholders, in other words, the entire zone of WME, got together, and we agreed that we could and would support triggers in a size and scope as noted below. So we played the game, not to use language but we said, okay, fine, you want to use exact and specific benchmarks. Then we came to the table and said, WME stakeholders came to the table and said, okay, instead of having a 20,000 square foot working yard, let's make it 5,000. Instead of having a 25,000 square foot on land boat storage, let's make it 5,000, and so on. Now, why do we do that? Because WME already knows what they're faced with. It's literally the amount of dirt. So if we're going to have requirements for how much dirt is in place, then make them reasonable for this zone. Okay, those are the suggestions. All right. I personally believe that those exact numbers are reasonable. I think they're fair. I think they're manageable. And if the city chooses to continue down the path of only using how much square footage you have of dirt and how much you have of a building structure, fine. This more appropriately fits this particular zone. Okay. Issue C, restaurant use. Today, and Stephen and I talked about this just for a blip by telephone the other day. Issue C is restaurant use. So today, and I know this is this can be a button pusher, right? But nonetheless, let's quickly go over it. Today, of those four zones, WMM, WMI, WMC, and WME, today, the only maritime zone which is required to go through the special exception process for anything under the restaurant use, and Lisa, you chime in here if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right.
All maritime has to go through the special exception process. They just have different standards that they have to comply with. But each of those zoning districts have to apply for a special exception to have a restaurant.
Okay, so is it fair to say that the process for WME is different than the other three zones?
The process is the same, but they have to meet those different triggers.
Right.
And then, yeah, they have like a different gross floor area that they're allowed to have. Some of the zoning districts can have rooftop dining, some cannot have rooftop dining.
Okay. So when I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off at all, but I
No
want to tell
problem.
you where I got that from. And then you tell this panel, please, how I'm wrong. Okay. Where I got that from is in restaurant use. Okay, and I made a note of it somewhere. Just bear with me. Here we go. Restaurant use. Okay, so under 21-64540. Okay.
Yes, the standards.
Yep. So then it says, all the way down here, standard L as in Larry, WME district. The WME district, the following may be permitted by special exception.
Yes, that is true. But each of those zoning districts have to have a special exception approval. And then, so
For
in that
for some
standard,
reason, that's, yeah.
yeah, sometimes when it comes to the standards and then the way that things get worded when legislation gets passed, it doesn't sometimes flow in a symmetric form. So
okay, fair enough.
Each zoning district would have to, for some reason, yes, that is pointed out, but you would also have to have one of those triggers in the WME of the working boat yard, the seafood processing, the size of the lot, and the gross floor of the that actual restaurant itself.
Yeah, and there is some language in the zoning of the size. I agree with you on that. We totally agree. What catches me is that in that use for restaurant, it's specific to WME, but it's not specific as special exception to the other maritime zones. Okay.
Right.
And again,
if you actually look at the table of uses, under the table uses where you see restaurant, it has the S and then the dash STD, meaning that it's a special exception approval. And then you have to go look at the standards, which is the 21-64-540. And then you have to look at what zoning district that restaurant is in and meet those qualifications or comply with those standards.
Okay.
But everyone has to go through the special exception process in the maritime zoning district.
Okay. I totally understood now. That's not the way I read it. And so there you go. So you can make a note on my work product there on my document. Fair enough. Okay. So, nonetheless, to get to the bottom of this so you guys are all done hearing me out. How do I make this bigger? Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay. So nonetheless, the same conversation with the WME stakeholders in 2021. This restaurant topic was presented, and we proposed, WME proposed to the city at the time. Miss Finlayson agreed with it, and a couple of the aldermen, actually several of the aldermen agreed to it. And then we made these suggestions that under issue C of how a restaurant might unfold through the course of an application and a use in WME. Okay. Addressing the triggers that Lisa just brought up. So one of the, I wrote in here, one of the triggers above, which is quite literally above, and then in addition to an actively operating crane, a travel lift, or a maritime proposed forklift, and then any two of the water access initiatives set forth in 2021. So the effort here is to still remain open-minded about restaurant use in WME. We all know we have it today, but how can we go about expanding it if the opportunity is solid and good? And here again, the triggers, as Lisa just expressed, are finite and exact. Can we, if we're going to use finite and exact articles in these codes, et cetera, then how about we structure them down to something that's a bit more realistic for this particular zone? Okay. And that's what's proposed here. To further address that even more, the next page down, WME was fine with, for example, no more than 4,000 square feet for dining. Okay, outdoor rooftop is permitted, subject to the following: alcohol. And there's a reasonable list here of things to accommodate the concerns of the residents, where we're not going to be, nobody's building the next Chart House restaurant on the opposite side of Eastport. That's not going to happen. Okay, so instead we're realistically right sizing the requirements. Okay, finally, professional commercial office space. Okay, so I think that I'm going to use this as my summary. I think that in 1987, when all of this stuff was adopted, I get the feeling that everybody kind of looked around and said, okay, what we have here is a really cool city. We want to keep it like this for as long as we possibly can. Okay. And we don't want it to become something else that we see in other cities that we can frequent nearby. Okay. We don't want it to become a full-on industrial city. We don't want it to become fully residential. We want it to keep this character and nature that's been in place. So the city then took on this position of, okay, well, we want to keep maritime uses in here, and how are we going to prevent other uses from coming? Well, the trouble with that is that you don't know what you don't know. Just like I didn't know that everybody has to go through an special exception process until I asked Lisa. Okay. The reality is that we don't know what we don't know. In 1987, there was no such thing as email. There was no such thing as the internet. There was no such thing as this Zoom call we're on right now. Now, how can we possibly go and make the requirement of today's use and application for commercial properties based on things that were put into hard place rule when they simply are not relevant today? Okay. And I think that's kind of where I'll leave it. I very much appreciate everybody listening to me. This is something that I think is important for the city. And I'm very open to anybody finding something that's wrong with what I'm proposing. Lisa, thank you for pointing out the obvious to me. But I think that I'll end with this. I think the right thing to do is treat all of these zones fairly and equitably. And what the most recent 2021 adoption did was it handcuffed, perhaps not intentionally, okay, but it really did handcuff the ability for those commercial properties to naturally expand to a tenant, a customer, a renting base that is viable, that thrives, and is important. And I'll end with that.
So, Seth, a couple things I'd like to say just for context, having helped to staff the Maritime Task Force. I think that the task forces, and this is, again, just for context, the preservation of the larger maritime operations that were deemed vital to maintaining our maritime cluster and vital to the city. I think that was the focus of the task force, and anchoring them, preservation through anchoring them to the incentives and the triggers. And I also seem to recall that keeping the requirements high, the thresholds and I'll say, triggers and incentives high, was also an attempt, I think intentionally, to limit the gross proliferation of non-maritime across the Maritime District. So just from a context standpoint, I think that was that's where they were coming from.
Let me just throw a tidbit at you. I'm the context of it, I'm not disputing. I'm wise enough to understand the intent and the context and where that comes from. But I'm also paying attention as we all should, to the reality that again, that context was created in 1987 when perhaps McNasby's was a thriving oyster shucking building. And it was for 100 years prior to that. Unfortunately, the reality is it's not anymore, to the degree where the city in its own volition said, we're going to make this thing a museum. Okay. They even for a few minutes tried a little restaurant in there. That didn't work, as I recall.
So
so the context is good. Where we land with it today is no longer, it's not applicable.
Yeah. Well, I'm referring to the context of the task force from 2021, not 87, but I understand what you're saying.
Unfortunately, they didn't leave 1987 in that one.
So I guess what I would ask you, and you've done some yeoman's work for sure, but if your recommendations were adopted, what would your spreadsheet look like? What would be the impact? If we could see that,
stay tuned.
Numerically, that would be very helpful, I think, for the group. So
that's the biggest smile yet from Wendy. I'll just point that out. Stay tuned.
I'm sure
There's
others
more to come,
have,
Lisa. I promise.
have reactions or things to say. Eric, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized the task force well, Stephen. You know, we didn't go into that process, you know, looking to you know, really expand non-maritime more than absolutely necessary. I mean, that was really not the intent of the task force at all. It was really to preserve and expand maritime use, maritime industry uses, and the viability of Annapolis as this sort of one-stop shop maritime center. So, you know, there was obviously a lot of discomfort on the task force whenever the discussion of expanding non-maritime came up. I think, you know, I'm sensitive to the points about the seafood processing. I mean, I think that was a good line of discussion tonight. But, you know, the other triggers, I think, are all pretty viable in terms of being kind of the vital operations that are needed. And I think there's always, you know, I think I get the point about the difference in scale between the WME and the WMI and WM. You know, and that's really, I mean, I think that's the crux of this working group is, you know, is there, we don't want to lose more maritime use than we have already. We want to protect it. And I think that's the sensitivity here is at what point are we going to be risking more of, and at what point is it, it's inherently a challenge to understand what is needed to maintain these small properties today as maritime uses, you know, what flexibility is needed, if any, and at what point are we diluting what we have? So I don't have the answers right now, but I think this is a really viable discussion to continue. But.
Well, I know we've run right up against our time here. Seth's done a lot of work, and I definitely look forward to your updated spreadsheet. Did anyone have anything else to say?
Right size on the next one.
We just want to, you know, be cognizant of the time and respectful of everyone's time.
Great. Yeah, and by the way, I'd encourage anybody if you review this and have some notes or catch me in an error or a flaw, or if perhaps I've literally done bad math, please show me, because I think it's rather important.
Steve, do we have any kind of homework or assignments for people before the next meeting?
Well, if everyone could look at what I guess we can push out what Seth shared today. If everyone could look at that and provide some feedback, that would be helpful. And then obviously Seth will come back with an updated spreadsheet of how things would look if the city were to adopt his recommendations. And I think that would be helpful for all of us as well. And anything else, any other thoughts from this meeting? Mike, you were part of the Maritime Task Force. Did you have anything else to add?
No, I think I don't think that Seth is really far afield on some of it. I think the task force was trying to find a way to deliver some flexibility to the properties that were hampered by their size, or the ones that were hampered by their proximity to the water. Both of those were, I think, in constant discussion. It was just we couldn't figure out what the right sauce was to be able to allow them to get a little bit more flexibility. It was hard to define. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's something in there, Mike, and Chris. I'll bet Chris would agree. There's something in there that could be. There's something reasonable that could be managed so that nobody's left behind. There's no reason to leave any property owner behind in this situation.
No,
you can
100%.
come up with something reasonable.
Yep, I agree.
Hope, Chris, any final thoughts?
No, I just wanted to be sure that anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk yet, otherwise, yeah, nope.
Steve, nothing from me, but excellent presentation, Seth. And I suspect there are areas for like further study to find where those sweet spots are. Obviously, the intent is that a non-maritime makes the overwhelming use of maritime more viable. You know, we're not talking about a rezoning here. So it's the question obviously presents itself, does doubling the size of allowable restaurant space support maritime use within the district? And that's a foundational type of question we need to explore as part of this. Because, and there, you know, zoning is inherently unfair if one looks at it from, you know, what I've got is different from what that guy over there has. I mean, folks who own property in the BCE zone or the B3 zone have more rights in terms of development potential than in the B2 zone. And that's the nature of the zoning framework. But if we work towards what's best for sustaining the maritime use in each of the different zoning category or districts, I think there's a real possibility to go deeper into this discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think I agree with you.
Well, thank you all for your participation today. And we've definitely had a robust discussion, and I'm looking forward to our next and final meeting. I hope our next meeting, I don't have it in front of me.
One moment. I think it is the 29th.
29th. Okay.
Of which
October, yes.
So that's just in 2 weeks.
It is, but we can postpone it if we.
I had in my head we was in November. I apologize, but
would it be better for everybody if we do it 3 weeks from now instead of 2 weeks? Of course, depending on my discussion with Mark and whether the Zoom account is available.
3 weeks. 3 weeks from today is election day.
Oh, good point. Yes, it is. Okay. We'll discuss. Yeah.
That might be the best time to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt. For me, that particular week of the 29th is a little bit of a challenge, but I can make it work. So whatever. I'm one of 10.
Well, I will discuss with Steve, and we'll get back to you all.
Thanks, everyone.